All right, Al. So we have our guest here tonight
Yeah, yeah,
from the great state of Texas.
yeah. Pretty excited.
Tell us who we got.
We have Mr. Ken Good, and he is legal counsel for the Texas Bail Bondsmen Association.
Excellent.
Yes, and he's you know when we first were talking about having him on, I'm like, well, unfortunately, I haven't heard of this gentleman before, so I did a little digging, and he graduated from Hardin Simmons University in 1982, master's from Tarleton State University in '86, and graduated Texas Tech Law School in 1989. He's been practicing law since then. As of 2012, he started the Good Law Firm that specializes in bail bonds matters.
Excellent.
And they also have a website for the Bail Bondsmen Association. We'll give it again at the end, but this is pbtx.com, and that is the Texas Bondsman Association website. He also maintains a podcast for that as well. That is thebailpost.com, which is available on all of your major podcast sites like Spotify, iTunes, etc. So he is going to be talking to us about bail reform in Texas,
Yeah, we've
which
done.
seems to be indicative of a problem we're seeing around the country.
Yeah. Well, Ken, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here, although I think it's almost past my bedtime.
Yeah, it is ours too. So don't let us fool you here,
But it's great to have you.
man.
Thank
We
you
are
for
excited to have you. It's awesome. I did.
Well, I will say, who would have ever dreamed that there was an area of law called bail law that there was to even specialize in? But, things started 6 or 7 years ago, and I told my guys, we're going to have to become experts on these things. And that's kind of what started us down this journey. And we started accumulating information for legislatures. So when somebody says, oh, Texas needs to adopt the New Jersey plan, well, nobody knows what the New Jersey plan is. So we did a article about it. We did a podcast about what is the New Jersey plan. And so our goal is to build a library of information to be a source for legislators. And I think it's worked out pretty well.
So it's by that it's safe to say that you are involved in lobbying efforts to the Texas legislature on behalf of the bondsmen.
I am on the legislative team. I'm also on the board of directors. We propose bills to the legislature. We're a resource to them. They call us, when something pops up on criminal justice reform, they'll call and ask us our opinion about things. And yes, and then the information we accumulate is available to other states as well. But we keep getting told to stay in our lane in Texas, and that's more than enough for me. I'm not looking to go outside Texas.
So, in doing some prep, I was looking at what was going on with bail reform in Texas, and apparently there have been some major changes to Harris County, which, for those that don't know, and I didn't know, is metropolitan Houston, correct?
Yes, it is.
So kind of tell us what is the history of this bail reform effort in Texas? How did this get started, and where are we now?
Well, we kind of have a tale of two cities. So we have the legislature in Texas, and then we have Harris County. We have a county commissioner that in Harris County that approached some left-wing prosecutors and invited them to come to his county to sue the county over their bail system. And I think it was done on purpose because they couldn't get any changes done in the legislature, so they tried to weaponize a federal court. And so they did that. They sued in federal court in Harris and Houston over misdemeanor bail bonds. And they got a new system in place for that that's terrible. There's an 80% failure to appear rate. And then they tried.
Let me interrupt you for a second. You said the prosecutors did this?
No, the commissioner invited a group of plaintiffs' attorneys to file suit against the county. So it's kind of like a friendly suit. The county said, "Oh yeah, bail reform is need to be made," and so we have the sheriff that filed an affidavit saying, "Oh, bail was unconstitutional." The DA at the time did.
The sheriff?
The DA and the sheriff. It was
Wow.
a couple of judges filed affidavits saying bail was unconstitutional the way it was being done. Well, hey, that was 6 or 7 years ago. Let's fast forward now. The Fifth Circuit just ruled this year that case was reversed, and that case should have never been filed in federal court. The problem is Harris County has not changed from when they got the court to enter a ruling that's set some really bad practices in place. Then you go to the legislature. The legislature is strengthening. They're doing the opposite of what Harris County is doing. So they're strengthening the criminal justice system. So that's why I say we have this tale of two cities. We've got Harris County trying to weaponize a court to go in one direction, and that's now been said they did it absolutely wrong. That case should have never been filed, but they've never tried to set it aside. And then we have the legislature doing the opposite, which is good.
So for Denny and I sitting here in Virginia, and we were talking about this before we went on air, like, this is not the kind of thing we expect to hear from the Lone Star State.
From Texas, yeah. I mean, that's
absolutely, absolutely. It is not what we, but that's what we're seeing in other places. Look in LA, where they've weaponized a federal court or a state court, where they filed suit to re-implement zero bail, and the other elected officials of that party refused to defend the lawsuit. So the judge is like, well, nobody's here to defend it, so I'm going to reinstate zero bail. It's very similar where, these groups are not having luck in the legislature, so they're going off and going through the courts where they're finding friendly judges to implement things that they can't get done in the legislature.
So when you talk about zero bail, you are literally meaning zero bail. There's a charge. You do not have to put anything up for your promise to appear in court, and you just hit back on the street.
Well, and we call that here simple release, and the simple release can be several different things, but it's the same result. California, it's a zero bail. In New York, it's released on no bond. In Texas, it's released on a personal bond. But it's all, you're released at no cost on your own promise that you'll reappear. And we're getting consistently the same results. California, in their misdemeanor cases where they do this, they have an 80% failure to appear rate. That means 80% of the time people don't come to court. If you don't come to court, your case gets put on hold. It can't go forward until you come back, which you can imagine. That means cases get into chaos. They have to dismiss cases. Harris County, they follow the same model. They got the same result. You can go to harriscountycourtwatch.com. 80% failure to appear rate on misdemeanor courts. What does that mean? Chaos. What does that mean? They have to dismiss cases. August of last year, I looked at their summary. Because they're always getting the same number of cases added on average. And so to prevent the collapse of the system, they have to resolve cases. And so like in August of last year, I looked at their disposition list. Over 90% of them were dismissed for the month.
Wow. So basically what's happening is because they're not showing up and these cases are you're getting this tremendous backlog that the system just cannot sustain. So to compensate for the backlog, we just got to dismiss it. We just got to just, at the stroke of a pen, just dismiss case after case after case. Now, are they having to appear in court though for dismissal?
No, I mean, not in Harris County. Now, I'm sure they don't. They don't have to appear for a dismissal. They would have to appear for a plea. They would have to appear to be found guilty. So that's like the one thing you can do without them there. You can dismiss the case.
Okay, so now I'm just almost at a with my head.
My head's exploding.
So now what I'm thinking is I get arrested for a crime. I get arrested. Police department takes me into custody for whatever crime. I don't have to do anything but say, yeah, officer, I'll go to court. Hey, so I'm back home or I'm back on the street. I don't go to court. Well, if I start knowing this is the issue, well, all I got to do is just not appear to court, and more than likely they're going to dismiss it anyway. Worst case scenario is eventually I go to court, but more than likely they're just going to dismiss it. So I don't get any repercussions for what I have done.
Absolutely. And it's worse than that, because like in California, they did a referendum to change certain felonies to misdemeanors. So if you stole stuff less than $950, it was no longer a felony, it was a misdemeanor. Well, then the DAs in the urban areas said, well, we're not going to prosecute that. That's why you have run amok shoplifting in California, stores closing because they're not prosecuting theft.
I
And
believe
we're
the headline
seeing that.
today was 30 million
Yeah.
in theft, retail
Well,
related theft in Los Angeles area alone.
well, the untold story that's going to be the news in the next 5 years or next 3 years is commercial property. In San Francisco, the occupancy rate for commercial property is 30%. Businesses can't survive. Buildings can't survive only renting out 30% of their businesses. So you're going to have defaults left and right in the next few years. And that's the next thing. And you're not even talking about it. Not really. You're just starting. You're just now starting, on News Nation. They did a town hall and suddenly you had Democrats attacking Democrats saying, we've got to do something about crime. And then the NAACP in Oakland just came out in the last 2 weeks attacking elected officials of their own party saying, we've got to have some kind of emergency endeavor on crime because it's just running amok.
Jeez. Yeah. I mean, it just seems like it's this vicious circle of people getting arrested, nothing happening, charges go away, they're getting rearrested, charges go away.
So does this extend to felony crimes as well, or is it limited to misdemeanors?
Well, it starts with the misdemeanors, and so you can see them. Our elected officials are trying to draw a line in the sand, saying, "Well, we're going to focus on violent offenses," but then they keep moving, the yard line of what is a violent offense. They'll change crimes and declassify them. Oh, they're not really violent. I mean, that used to be violent. It's not violent anymore under a new definition, and it's one of the reasons why I say this is not sustainable is because it's just causing crime to increase. The only reason why we're not saying, hey, crime is just increasing is we've got crime that's not being reported. You've got stuff that they don't prosecute anymore. So we've got an artificial number saying, oh, crime's down. No, it's not. I mean, people in the urban cities don't believe crime's down. They believe they don't feel safe, and you've got businesses running out. And so, right before the last election, the politicians on the left were saying, oh, it's not a real issue. This is a made up issue by the right. Now you've got people on the left fighting with each other saying this is a really bad issue and we've got to address it. So I'm hoping this election will be different.
I'm not going to lie. Watching that fight transpire has been amusing.
Well, but I would argue that we're just going through a cycle that we've been through in the past. In the 60s, we felt safe.
That's
and
true.
So we were told we needed to be more forgiving, and so we were, and we loosened up our criminal laws. And what happened? We had more crime, and we had a lot of the same issues. Probably not as hard of a left-wing change because we have all this social media now. But I think then we had the 80s, we had the backlash, we got Reagan, we got tough on crime, and so I think we're going through that same cycle. I really do.
Now, let me ask you, I've listened to some of your podcasts, I've read some of your articles and stuff like that, and definitely very knowledgeable, and you have done a lot of work in this area, no doubt. But, my question is, do you see this major push for a lot of the bail reform almost as a Trojan horse for decriminalization?
I think there's a coalition on the left, and so not everybody in the coalition agrees. They're there as a part for different reasons, and that's what makes up the majority. But I do believe that there is a strong component of the coalition that wants chaos, and they really want decriminalization. There's another part of the coalition that I call the true believers, and they want to be more forgiving. And I think those people are starting to see the light when you have a Democrat mayor of a city coming out on a town hall saying, until we have a viable alternative that has accountability as a strong component of it, we have to continue using the private bail industry because they get people to court. Nothing else does.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of my concern is that some of the push is, we can't get laws off the books per se, or we can't, eliminate the law, but we can start reducing like you say, from felonies to misdemeanors, and then we're not prosecuting them, we're not going forward, and you're kind of getting that result through another means.
How do we reconcile this? And I'm interested to hear your experience in Texas, for example. So we have a couple crimes that society has deemed to be particularly serious, and but those crimes are largely misdemeanors, barring certain circumstances, and those crimes are driving while intoxicated and domestic battery. And if Texas is similar to Virginia, where we are, that domestic battery is a misdemeanor unless it rises to aggravated assault, malicious wounding. You're drawing blood, you're using a weapon, there's an attempt to potentially kill somebody. But if you just strike somebody, that's simple battery. Those are crimes that society said those are very serious, and particularly with domestic battery. I mean, you have the whole victim side of that. How is that getting addressed in Texas?
It's not in Texas. I mean, I've got an example in Houston where a husband was arrested for, killing the family cat and then assaulting someone. He got released on a PR bond. He immediately assaulted his wife, and then he got arrested again, got another PR bond, and within 48 hours, he killed his wife and stabbed her stomach 30 something times because she was pregnant, and he didn't want another man raising his second child. And so,
and we know those crimes, that simple domestic battery is going to do what you just said. It's going to rise to that.
Well,
that
it's a terrible situation. It's a terrible situation because if you think about it, those cases also have a high level of dismissal. Because if I'm getting a divorce with my wife and my wife decides that, I really never loved her and that I need to be taught a lesson, one of the things is done is the children make accusations against the spouse about improper contact. And so sometimes that becomes a weapon in a divorce case, and so there's a high level of dismissal of those types of cases, and that can't be reconciled. And so you have to take those very serious, and we're not taking them serious. And
so if you're a domestic battery victim in Harris County, you're on your own.
Absolutely. And the biggest problem I have is you look in New York with Braggs, he won't protect you. The police can't protect you. He's tied their hands. But if you try to protect yourself, damn it, he is going to file charges on you.
That's amazing.
We just saw that happen.
That's awful. If you can't protect me, please, dear God, let me protect myself. And he's not doing that. He won't. But that's also something that we repeated in the 60s. That's something we did there too. So it's repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think that is a good point of it's kind of like a new cycle where we've seen it before, been there. It's just going through that next cycle.
And I think somebody like a Bragg, I almost think he falls into that true believer category, but so much damage is being done. I've really started to question that. And
well, you know what? Let me make a different argument for that. I can argue a different argument completely. I would say, let's say 4 election cycles, we went through a period of time where every 6 months before a national election, there was something that was used. We would have protests, and the left would tell their supporters, you're being mistreated by the criminal justice system. You need to get angry, and you need to come out and vote in larger numbers. After the election, nothing changed. They go right back to what they were doing. And so their supporters saw that, and they started electing the true believers. And so I would argue that another possibility is the mob has gotten away from them. They've started electing the true believers, and now they've lost control, and they're in a box. You could argue Bragg's in the box. He knows what he's doing. He knows the damage he's doing. He just can't get out of the box. That I think you saw that in Illinois. For 6 months they were saying the Supreme Court was going to reverse the Safety Act, and it's just like, oh, that was for gospel, and then they didn't, and they made a terrible argument when they did. But I told people, I said, let me tell you what they were doing. They were saying, don't expect us to save you, politicians. If you don't think this is good policy, then you go save yourself and find a compromise and get yourself out of the box, and don't expect us to do it.
So is this something that is happening predominantly in Harris County, or is this really spreading throughout Texas?
Well, no, it's in Harris County. I mean, but you're seeing it in other states. You know, Alaska tried it; they repealed it. You're seeing states that have tried it early and they've started. How many times has New York repealed portions of their bail reform? I mean, they're on their fourth or I think third or fourth rollback of their bail reform. So, in California, had an election to get rid of cash bail, and it failed. So, I mean, you see, even some of the left leaning states are not going to they're not going to go down this road. It's too much for them, and they see why. I mean, when you can't go down the street to buy something without risking your life, you can't go to work without risking your life. I mean, which building was it in? Is it San Francisco where the Nancy Pelosi federal building? They just advised all the employees working there work from home because it's not safe to come to work. That's ridiculous.
Because of the there's apparently retail space in there, and it was the flash mob thefts.
Flash mob, but also drugs. Drugs running amok in the surrounding area.
Jeez. Now, I will pose this question to play the devil's advocate. What do you say on the argument when someone comes and goes, well, you know, cash bail does disparage against me. I'm poor. I don't have money and I get arrested for a crime and I may not have committed that crime, but now I have to sit in jail because I can't put up the money and it's strictly
Sure.
financial that I can't go back home.
I would say, first of all, that it is a myth that there are poor people stuck in jail, especially for first-time offenders. There's no first-time offenders in Texas stuck in jail. I mean, I would say that's the first thing that we've proven in bail reform. Also, I did a podcast on this with a social scientist that looked at it, and he said the number one reason why people languish in jail is not poverty, it's criminal history. And so, sir, if you have a criminal history and you have a history of 3 or 4 arrests and you're stuck in jail because they said you're a higher risk, they gave you a greater bond, well, then you're not in jail because you're poor. You're in jail because you have a criminal history. And then the last thing,
speaking to myself, I think that jives. I mean, would you agree, Danny, that kind of jives with our observations over 20, 25 years?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
You know,
well, but the problem we have is, you know, in these areas, they want to treat everybody the same when they commit the same crime, no matter what their criminal history. So if you're arrested for a DWI, or if you're arrested for DWI third, or if you're arrested for a carjacking, they want you treated the same as anyone else charged with that crime, no matter your criminal history, which just turns our criminal history on its head. And then the last thing I would say on this issue is the different release mechanism has a big difference in failure to appear rates. The private industry has the lowest failure to appear rate. That means more people will go to court, more cases will get resolved, more people will get justice. Everything else has a 40, 50, 60% failure to appear rate. That leads to chaos. That means you cannot get cases resolved. And I would say until we get an alternative that's anywhere close as good as the private industry, then I would say the least you got to agree is we've got to keep the devil we know so we can get cases resolved. Or I would even say keep the system that works and that works well until we can find something that is anywhere close, and we haven't.
No, I think that's a good response. I mean,
that's completely logical. The thing that, again, I circle back to the victim component that just seems to be completely lacking in the philosophy of the people that are driving.
Well, we've lost the side of the victims, because look at, you know, who's the number one victim? 50% of all victims of murder in the United States are young black men. Who's the ones committing the crime? Young black men as well. But we've elevated the criminal over the victim. We've completely forgot about the victim.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I think that's something when people make that argument of, well, how do you say it doesn't disparage against me? They forget the whole, you know, the victim does have a right to be protected or not reoffended against. You know, not every crime has that component to it. But man, I think that's a great point, because I saw that a lot in my career. Most of any time that the bail was high or a pretty good amount it was the criminal history.
Yeah,
was the
Sure.
Absolutely.
And you're right. And the first time offenders for the minor offenses, they all went.
Yeah,
They all gave a promise. They got a PR. But when they came in there and they had failure to appears before, or they had the criminal history before, they didn't. They had to wait till they got to see a judge. So that's
this thing
Yeah.
is being done seemingly in the name of social justice. And, those victims, if particularly if you're talking about a high crime area, we're talking about poor people, we're talking about minorities, at-risk populations, things like that, that they're the ones that are losing it. It's not to be very blunt, the affluent white activists living in the
Yes.
suburbs.
You know,
They're
there's
not
been
feeling
articles
it.
that have shown the disproportionate percent of victims of these reforms are those very minorities that they're trying to protect. And I would say, even if you want to say they're good intended and they want to protect the poor, they're tying the hands of judges so that judges then cannot do anything about organized crime, gang members, or career criminals. And when you tie their hands in the name of protecting the poor so that they can't address those things, then you're getting what you asked for. You're going to get more crime.
Yeah, that's true. And I believe, the stats on hand. I mean, the stats are showing that. I think
Sure.
the numbers are showing the increase.
There was something on Instagram a couple days ago where it was showing uh, OCA or whatever her name is in DC saying that people are hurting for food, and so they have to evaluate whether they're going to break into a business to get bread to feed their children. And then on the bottom half of the screen was these flash mobs stealing clothes, flash mobs stealing jewelry. And
Yep.
so the audio for
Wow.
that was, oh, they just need bread to feed their family. But the reality is so much worse. I mean, these are organized events by organized crime. And, when you take a step back and you tie the hands of police officers so they can't do anything, organized crime has found a way to make a killing here. And we're just
Jeez.
letting them.
Now, I also, because we talk a lot about, law enforcement. We talk about that, section of the criminal justice system a lot, and we talk about, a lot of the morale and stuff within law enforcement. And I know I've read some stuff, and I've heard you talk about some stuff about the criminal cases not being filed, a drastic reduction in the number of cases that are being filed. And I can't help but to think that could be very well the issue of a morale issue where officers are
Sure.
like, why am I going to spend all this time taking this person into custody, getting this report done, getting everything done that I have to get done to just have it tossed time and time and time again? They're just going to be like, we're not even, why even enforce that anymore?
Yes, I agree. I think that's exactly what's happening. We just, they're like, they'll get released before I even finish the paperwork. And so you'll see there's what the studies show in Harris County is there's a larger number of serious misdemeanors. So the worst on the spectrum of all the misdemeanors, the worst misdemeanors have an increase, but everything else, they're down like 10,000, 20,000 cases, and they're still backlogged. Can you imagine in Harris County if
Wow.
were still
Jeez.
filing cases in the numbers that they were? I mean, they couldn't function. I mean, they're preventing collapse of the system by dismissing everything in their misdemeanor system. It's just ridiculous. And their jail is full, and it's full of very dangerous, violent offenders because they see that they've been given the green light to commit more crime for the last several years, and they've
Man,
done it.
I think that's absolutely. I mean, if you're going to do minor crimes, smaller crimes, and you're going to
Mhm.
constantly get away with it, then
Well,
you're going to start to push the envelope.
it's
Sure.
the
don't
give
think.
a mouse a cookie
Yeah,
mentality.
I think that's an easy correlation to make. That you're going to continue to get away with these crimes. Well, now you're going to step it up, and now you're getting into the serious crimes.
Well, the best way it was described to me is, like in New York, probably where y'all live too, but in Houston, there's a city within the city. There's the law-abiding citizens, and then there's inside Houston, there's a small, very much smaller city within the city of criminals. And then there's a gray area between the two cities where every day those people are deciding, hey, am I going to be a law abiding citizen or am I joining Crime Town? And when they see that no one is being held accountable, Crime Town is growing exponentially because there's no consequences.
That's
yeah.
a very good point. And see, now one thing that we have that is different in Virginia, our state constitution says that you shall release on a summons for
Oh,
a
wow.
misdemeanor, barring certain circumstances.
There's
So,
some
like,
misdemeanors that are an exception to that.
exactly, like
But
DUI is a misdemeanor. Well, you don't release that on a summons. Domestic
Yep,
battery,
that's so.
um,
Weapon on school
um,
property, I think, is
yeah,
one. Things like that.
if the individual is intoxicated, refuses to identify, fails to discontinue the illegal act, things like that are
What if
exceptions.
they fail to appear? Does the Constitution allow
Well,
them to
then,
be held after that?
correct. Yeah. So if you
Yes.
fail to appear in even the most liberal of Virginia courts on a summons that was issued, say, trespassing or something like that, right?
Yep.
You fail to appear, that judge is going to issue a failure to appear warrant, period.
Yes.
See, we don't have that in Houston right now. I mean, the settlement that they entered in the federal court said you had to miss court at least 2 or 3 times before they could do anything to you. They agreed to that as part of the settlement. So, I
Wow.
mean, that's all about accountability. If your judges will hold them accountable, so they get a summons the first time. They're problem children. They're going to miss court. Nobody's reminding them, and
Yep.
so they'll end up back with a bondsman in a worse situation with a higher bond than they would have if their first bond had been a surety bond.
Wow. So they have to miss more than several times before
Yes.
anything's actually really done. Wow.
Yeah.
See, now we don't have. Thankfully, that hasn't come here. I mean, I used to remember folks that I would arrest if we arrested them on a failure to appear. That's the first thing I always ask. How do you think I'm going to get a bond? I'm like, well, here we usually don't give you a second chance to fail to appear. So, and that you could usually.
Well, but y'all know this because the public, I don't think, knows it. When there's a failure to appear and you're on a surety bond, the bondsman has an incentive to go find you. So
Yes.
there was someone following them, looking for them, talking to a family member. But if you're on a summons or a personal bond or no bond, well, there's a failure to appear warrant. There's a warrant issued, but it goes down to the warrant division down the hall, and it joins in our urban areas the tens of thousands of other warrants waiting to be served, which means no one's looking for them. They have to commit another crime to come back into the system, or they have to voluntarily come on their own. And I don't think people realize that is a humongous difference in our system that we have, and we're not getting credit for that. In fact, we're the low-hanging fruit. We're easy to attack. I mean, I tell my bondsmen all the time, I'm like, you're a bondsman. We don't believe you. And they're like, oh, but you'll be there to explain it, Ken. And I'm like, no, I'm the lying bondsman's lying attorney in those situations. So we have to work very hard for good reputations, and it doesn't take very much to lose it. So you got to be careful.
Well, that kind of leads into to my next question, which was like, so this whole situation was created under the auspices of social justice. But how do you respond to that accusation that, well, the bondsmen have a financial interest in bail?
Well, I would say we provide a public service. We provide the best public service to get people to court, and we are a business. There was, I would just, I would quote the Democratic mayor who was on News Nation in the last 2 weeks, and she said, the reason people go to court using the private system is our whole economy is based on money. And so when you make money as a condition of going to court, there's a higher appearance rate. And we've got to figure out a way to get people to go to court as well as the private industry has. So, we don't cost the taxpayers a dime. I mean, we provide something that, Washington, D.C. decided years and years and years ago to replace the private industry with a state, a Washington, D.C. wide pretrial services department. And I did a podcast with someone who was describing that to me. And even with all the money they spend, it's still not as good as the private industry, but it's close. But you know what he said? He said, if we were to vote to do this system today, it would never pass because it's so expensive. So the problem is in all this bail reform across the United States, they're not even attempting to do what Washington, D.C. is doing because they know how expensive it is. So they're just doing it on the cheap. Let's release everybody. Oh, they'll come back. Oh, yeah, they won't commit more crime. Everybody wants to get their cases resolved. People are basically good. They're not basically bad. And I'm like, well, that's not true. The Bible says we're all basically bad until, but
Right.
for the grace of God.
That's a fool's paradise they're trying to push.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm really trying to wrap my head around some of this. This is, the problem is it's he's right. I mean, it's kind of going everywhere.
Well, that's a concern. Is it going to continue to spread? Or are we going to get a handle on it? You mentioned with Harris County where they had ruled that the original filing should have never happened. That should have never occurred. But you said Harris County is not correcting that,
Yes.
so they're
Well, I will.
they're just marching on as normal, going, "Oh well, yep,
Well, of course it's a little bit more complex than that. So
sure,
they had the Harris County case. So then they filed a Dallas County case to extend the misdemeanor ruling to felonies. That went up to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit said no, we're not going to extend it. And then they went in en banc. So the whole Fifth Circuit they reversed the first opinion, and they reversed the Harris County opinion, and said that should have never been filed. The Dallas County case has just had a petition for cert filed at the United States Supreme Court. And so the response is due the 1st of September. So we should have a decision on whether the Supreme Court will accept
okay,
that case. And so I think the judge in Harris County is waiting until that the decision on the petition for cert is made before she acts on her case. But the county, they will do nothing. They will do nothing to try to overturn that decision because,
oh,
they don't care. It's all politics. It's all policy. It's a policy disagreement. Crime be damned. They'll just say, "Oh, well, this is a made-up issue. Crime's not increasing." No matter what the elected officials or the Republicans, no matter what the police say, no matter what y'all say about crime, y'all are just lying because it's working great.
But that says that there's a plurality of voters in Harris County that are on board with that.
Well, I mean, yes, when you look at it, you would say yes, but there's a lot of litigation going on right now over the last election because quinky dink of all quinky dinks, there was a group of Republican polling places that just happened to run out of paper on election night for ballots. And so people were turned away. And so, but it only affected Republican leaning polling places. Dadgummit. And so this paper thin election where they were saying that crime was not an issue, and I don't think they say that now. So I don't know. I think in the next election may not be as close because we all agree crime's an issue now, but it's just not their fault. It's somebody else's,
I hope the voters down there are really kind of taking that to heart and paying attention and understanding that it's only going to get worse. I mean,
Yeah, but identity politics is so bad. I mean,
It is.
part of the identity politics is I can argue whatever I want. I can make a great point, but they're going to say, ignore everything Ken says because of his identity. You have to disagree with everything he says because of your identity. And that's kind of where we are. I mean, if you think about it, they've done a really good job of dividing people up into identities. And the thing that's really impacting federal elections right now is the issue of abortion.
yeah, yeah,
They
that
would
is
say
big.
Republicans underperformed in the last election, and it was because of the issue of abortion.
Yeah, and most elections are local.
Yeah.
And even as we try to make it about these big national issues, local is the most important. And
Well, but when
I
we
would
have
just
identity politics, and they're saying that we're lying, and so so you believe them. You're going to believe them for an election cycle, and you may believe them one more. So that's why I'm saying, it's slow sometimes for the pendulum to swing back, but eventually, the public's going to come across just like in the 70s and 80s, and they're going to say, y'all been lying to us. Crime is increasing, and now there's going to be a penalty to pay.
So you do believe there is going to be a time where that pendulum is going to start to swing back. We're just
I
going to
think
get to that
it
break
has started.
Yeah.
I think it started. It's not sustainable. I mean, that's why I have hope.
Yeah.
What's happening right now is not sustainable. LA cannot sustain what they're doing. San Francisco cannot sustain 30% occupancy rate on their commercial buildings. I mean, those are recipes to put businesses and cities out of business.
Yeah.
And God forbid a Republican get in the White House and San Francisco go broke because they're not going to help them at all.
Right. Yeah.
and you have those cities, whether it's Seattle, Portland, San Francisco,
look at Portland.
places
man.
in your state, Austin. I know they're having
Sure.
major problems recruiting and retaining officers.
Yes.
'Cause nobody in their right mind wants
Right.
to work in
No.
that environment.
Well, yeah.
Well, but why? It's, the Democrats have created a mob. They created a mob every 6 months before a national election. Now they've lost control over the mob. And so you can't work in a place where if you take one step out of line, or you just arrest someone in a bad situation and someone wants to say you were wrong, even if you weren't. I mean, I wouldn't. Can you imagine being a newly married couple and have a young baby and live in Austin and be a police officer when the elected officials don't have your back? They're
Yeah.
just waiting to throw you under the bus. I'm sorry. I'm going to choose my child. I'm going to choose my wife.
Yeah,
No.
it's not surprising that the officers in those localities are leaving in droves.
No,
Mm-hmm.
I have a good friend of mine who is a detective in Austin, and I know he's pulling his hair out on a daily basis.
It makes a perfect storm, as far as I see. It makes that perfect storm for the crime to run rampant with the bail, that bail reform agenda, trying to eliminate the cash bail. That has its own effect, then killing the morale of your police department,
Sure.
basically just neutering your police and your law enforcement. And then they're just leaving. So now not only are they not able to do their job, there's few there to even do the job when they are called. The resources aren't there.
Well, and you see these same elected officials that were Black Lives Matters. We got to defund the police now, saying, "Why is crime up? Our police are not doing their jobs." Well, no, you freaking ran them out of town.
Yeah, yeah. Every time they did, you hung them out to dry.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen some of that here.
Oh yes.
Yes. Our city police department here has, last I counted, there were 150 officers, or maybe it was 170, and there were 725 authorized.
It's probably higher than that.
And Brian, that was months ago. That
Yeah.
was like 150 or somewhere around there. So they just don't have the bodies.
And that's everywhere.
Nobody's willing to stand up to the mob. We have an uncontrollable mob, and as long as we have that situation, it's going to continue to get worse because we're going to continue to have flare-ups, whether it actually happened or whether someone's just taking his advantage of a bad situation.
Well, I agree in so much as it does blur that line between, that officer who really did do something wrong versus that officer who didn't do anything wrong, took the appropriate action, but is treated the same as the officer who did something that was inherently wrong.
Yeah, but how many situations have we had where we've had protests 6 months before election and the guy didn't do anything wrong? I mean, we've had multiple examples of those, but it's been used to create a mob to say, "Oh, y'all have been mistreated. You need to come out and vote in higher numbers." And it was done because they needed those to win, and then they won. And so now we're at the point where that's not enough. Now we have an uncontrollable mob, and the mob is electing the true believers, and those are wackadoodles, is what I would say.
Yeah.
It's
I don't know.
it's good to be retired.
Yeah, right. It's good to be doing something different now, not being in the middle of that. It's a tough job.
Well, we're going to have more and more where we're going to have the mob. We're going to have, like in the Old West, we had the posse come and, when something happened, they chase down somebody and give immediate justice. We're going to start having more of that until, law enforcement and the elected officials come up with a plan so that they will have each other's backs and they can keep public safety going. And we don't have that right now. In our urban areas, it's just awful. We've destroyed families, so families don't stay together. We've destroyed schools. We have rampant drug abuse. We have no job opportunities. It's even worse now post the riots or as you would call it, protests, where we've burned down many businesses. And now we have public safety issues where we have shoplifting run amok, businesses closing because they can't withstand $25,000 a day shoplifting, or we just have business closing because they can't provide a safe environment in where their building's located. And that's just getting worse and worse and worse, and that can't continue. I mean, the reason why you have a Democrat starting to come out and question this is because they're seeing the damage they're doing to their tax base, and they know what the future holds if they don't speak up. That's why you're starting to see it change.
So let me ask you a question. You said I think it was the Harris County Sheriff had gotten behind
Sure.
this.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a full service sheriff's office?
Yes.
So they're doing patrol and investigations as well for Harris County.
Yes.
How the hell did he keep his job?
Well, because it was the height of, defund the police, and it was the height of, poor people are being stuck in jail. And so, it was from that perspective. The DA signed an affidavit too, but she ultimately came back and said she was wrong. And so she's been reelected at great numbers. And, the sheriff has been reelected because he got real quiet. He went silent. He quit talking about the issues.
Yeah, but I expect that kind of shenanigans from DAs. I don't necessarily expect it from sheriffs.
Yeah, but you've got people that were, so when this litigation was going on, the misdemeanor judges were defending it, and so you had the local newspaper, the county commissioner recruit people to run against them to say, "Oh, we have to settle. We have to settle. We've spent $8 million on attorney's fees." Well, they settled, and they spent $100 million implementing a settlement with the Fifth Circuit, which the Fifth Circuit now says the lawsuit should have never been filed in federal court. So, the people that were in office were winning the litigation. They kept going to the Fifth Circuit and winning, but then they had a new election. All the misdemeanor judges were defeated and replaced with people pledging to settle, and that's what they did. They entered into a settlement. They gave the plaintiffs everything they wanted, agreed that you had to miss court 2 or 3 times before they could do anything to you, and we wonder why crime is increasing.
Jeez. Yeah. Wow.
But again, you said this has not really caught on beyond Harris County.
No. Now we've had proposals like Bexar County has proposed that that their county commissioner, just like the Harris County commissioner, but the judges have not really gone with that. And so, no, I would say but we have some other areas. El Paso would probably be a good place where they would probably look more favorable on it. But for the most part, it's because they're more leaning left in El Paso than the rest of the state. But for the most part, it's an anomaly in Harris County, and that's leading the legislature to enact policies that prevents the rest of the state from trying to follow suit.
Well, that's good that they're trying to put some measures in to prevent that from spreading. It also sounds like the Supreme Court may look at this as well.
Yeah, but it's not on the whole issue about bail being constitutional, or it's on a technical issue about abstention. But
Gotcha.
it could be devastating to their whole little movement of weaponizing federal courts, because the Supreme Court of the United States could accept the case and then rule that the federal court should abstain from addressing these issues at all.
Okay.
And that would kick all this litigation out of federal court. So there is a big risk for them. And there is a conflict in the courts of appeals, and that's the number one reason why they accept cases. But it's a conflict that they created with their own case, so that discounts it. So I think they have a shot at getting it, but I think if they get it, the court's going to knock it out of the park, and they're not going to like the result. But that's just my opinion.
Sure. Now, I'm sure you stay up on all the progress for this. Is it something that you still discuss on your podcast pretty regularly, and on any kind of updates that come from this and legislative updates regarding this?
Yes, I think the last podcast we just released our last podcast, but the one before that was a legislative update. We always are following cases, and so we have podcasts that are just talking about case updates. And so I think I have 2 case updates. Neither one are dealing with the Dave's case that I'm just trying to find time to do a podcast on. We do 2 episodes a month, and so we're scheduled through probably October now, all the way through October for guests. And so we just have to find time to do a special podcast on a case update.
Okay, yeah, well, we know all about that. But well, Ken, man, I appreciate you staying up late tonight to speak with us.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Please keep us updated.
Sure. I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful, but there's still outliers like LA and California. They're trying to push the envelope, but they're pushing an envelope that gets worse and worse. And so their city managers and mayors are starting to see the light and starting to fight back. And as that gets worse for them, there'll be a turning of the tide. And you're seeing that's a turning of the tide in the blue states. The red states have already turned, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I hope you're right. I hope we are starting to see that turn, and maybe some people starting to get some realization of what's actually transpiring, and kind of swing that pendulum back. I think it's going to be a slow swing back, but
But at some point, you just have to
Yeah.
return to common sense.
you do.
I agree. That's probably the best statement of all. But the cycle has to come back, and we have to have public safety. If we can't have public safety, we go to chaos, and chaos in the criminal justice system is one thing, but chaos in society will lead to vigilante justice.
Yeah, the goal. I mean, the system should try to be compassionate. It should always be just. There are things that we should be doing and we should be having, but it cannot come at the expense of law and order and victims. It cannot come at the expense of victims.
Absolutely.
Well, we have poisoned this name of, broken windows theory of law enforcement, which is a tested and reasoned and very well proven theory of getting control of crime. And it's, you prosecute the small stuff. Well, we've just kind of planted the seed nationwide that, we shouldn't be concerned about misdemeanors. We should
100%
just be
agree.
concerned about
100%
violent
agree.
offenses.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that's
No
what
point.
has caused crime to go through the roof. And it will continue to do that until we return to basic theories of getting control of crime.
Yeah, I think the results pretty much prove how that was effective and really actually worked.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you so much. I think Texas is lucky to have you down there with all the work you do, and we appreciate you coming on Bad to the Bone so much.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. We know I bribed you to say nice things about me, so that you just send me a bill and I'll just I'll Venmo you. So, but thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it very much.
You bet. Thanks so much, Ken.
Thank you.